There we go. Just checking to make sure our recording is in progress. And everyone on Zoom should be able to hear us, can see and can hear you. So we have confirmation that we're good to go. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California for our program here Monday, March 27th, 2023. This is an in-person and a virtual program, and it's titled Contempo Jo Mora. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here this evening. For those of you who might be new to the Book Club of California, the Book Club of California is a nonprofit, member and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We also host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition by becoming a member or a donor. Our membership dues are modest, but the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So I encourage you to visit us online at bccbooks.org to join or donate to the Book Club of California. And now let me introduce our speaker, Peter Hiller. Peter is the Jo Mora Collection Curator at the Monterey History and Art Association, and he is widely recognized as the leading authority on Jo Mora. He has lived a career in the visual arts, teaching art and photography for almost 40 years. He was raised in West Los Angeles, and he earned a BA from Experimental Johnston College and his teaching credential from UCLA. He is the author of the book club's 238th publication titled The Life and Times of Jo Mora, Iconic Artist of the American West. Now, tonight, Peter will be talking about the creative career of Joseph Jacinto Jo Mora. Mora was an accomplished painter, a muralist, a sculptor, a building designer, a cartographer, an actor, a set designer, a cowboy, and a husband and father. His artwork sprang from his interest in numerous subjects, including Native Americans and cowboys, the American landscape, California history and its missions, the classics of Chaucer, and his love of animals. Now, his work as an illustrator, cartoonist, printer, and author closely parallels the work of the Book Club of California, and that is what is currently on display here in our club rooms. The artistic legacy of Jo Mora continues to evolve. Upon Mora's passing in 1947, his son, Jo Jr., lovingly worked to spread the word about his father's creative accomplishments. That endeavor has been passed along to Peter Hiller, the Jo Mora Collection Curator. Now, tonight, Peter is going to share how Jo Mora's art has and continues to find its way into popular culture and into the wider world in both traditional and in surprising ways. In terms of logistics, as I mentioned, we're online on Zoom, and we have about 100 people, I think, registered to join us remotely. So we are going to take questions from both our Zoom audience and our in-person audience here in the club rooms at the end of Peter's talk. So if you have questions on Zoom, you can use the chat and the Q&A functions, and we'll curate questions from those two sources at the top of the hour. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome Peter Hiller. Is this advancing for you? You're good to go.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you, everybody in the back who helped put this evening together on behalf of the book club. I've kind of standing there realizing this is a little bit bittersweet in that this is the closing event for this exhibition, which has been up for about a month or a little bit more. And Kevin and I don't have anything calendared in the future for the first time in years. We were interrupted by COVID, but everybody else was as well. So this is prolonged to this particular exhibit, but we're going to have to sit down and decide what's next. And I know some people have suggested a walking tour of Joe's work in downtown San Francisco as an idea. So I haven't forgotten that. We will keep that in mind. But thank you all for coming in person and those of you online as well. And what I wanted right off the bat, let you know that this is not going to necessarily be or be biographical in intent. That was the talk I did at the opening of the exhibit. And now the best way to find out that information is by buying the book. So I encourage you to support the book club by buying the biography that I wrote about Jo Mora. But this is going to take a little lighter turn and also kind of give you a sense of what's happened since, as Kevin said, since Jo Mora passed away in 1947. So I'm dedicating this to Joe's son, Joe Jr., who I had the pleasure of knowing and hanging out with and being able to ask him questions about his father, which he lovingly answered, always with a smile on his face. The family was a very tight group and they clearly loved each other. They supported each other. And this is a picture of Joey when he would have been about, I think 25 at the time, living in their family home in the Pebble Beach part of the Monterey Peninsula. And so we're going to explore what Joe did as an artist, but also what happened since he passed away. So this is an example of him as an etcher. And that is one of his actual copper plates that he carved back in his time. And I've discovered 6 of those in the Jo Mora archive, 6 different plates, and only a couple of them were ever printed. So I took it upon myself I decided, well, why not put together a portfolio of all of those plates and make them available for people. So I had a wonderful experience working with the graphics department at Monterey Peninsula College. I proposed this idea to them. They said yes. And we then spent a weekend printing from Jo Mora's etched plates and created this portfolio. So this came about again after Joe had passed away, but it celebrated the work that he had done during his career. That's the contents of the whole portfolio. We put it together in a little box set and we're able to sell it to cover the costs. And it turned out to be a wonderful project. So this is the kind of thing that I had the privilege of being able to do on behalf of the Mora family. My charge was that I could never take on a project that debited the family estate. And fortunately, every project I decided to do, and some of them were somewhat ambitious, I was able to make enough of a return on the product to pay all the expenses. So I was able to fulfill that obligation. These are other plates of Joe's. The dark one is an old plate going back to the 30s. In fact, that is used on one of the menus that we have here in the exhibit. The other 3 were done after Joe passed away from his artwork. One of the first things that I was ever involved with was an exhibit of Joe's work at the Monterey Museum of Art that took place in the summer of 1998. And to date, it is still the largest gathering of material by Joe that has ever occurred in a single place. This is one of the projects we did. I had the pleasure of meeting and then working with Nigel Holmes, you've probably seen his work without realizing it. He used to do maps for Time magazine and stuff. He's a very sought after cartographer, and he happens to love Jo Mora's work. And so it was easy to meet, and it was easy to decide, let's put together a finder's guide to Jo Mora's art across the United States. And so this is Nigel's design. The front is sort of a colorful illustration of it in the spirit of Joe's own parts. And then the backside lists location by location as to what's where and how to go see it. This actually has been reprinted 3 times over the years as it continues to sell out. And I discover new information, so I've edited it each of those times we've reprinted it. And the newest edition is very new. It's just a couple of months old. These are 2 other examples of maps that Nigel created on my behalf. These are in the biography. One is Joe's ride along the Mission Trail in California. The other is his trip from California to Arizona, where he would then live with the Hopi. And this is the spread from a book that Nigel created himself about pictorial maps. So Joe's maps fit into the category referred to as pictorial maps. This is Joe's map of the Grand Canyon, but Nigel included it as an illustration in a small chapter about Jo Mora in his extensive book about pictorial maps. Speaking about Arizona, Joe spent almost 3 years living with the Hopi and the Navajo. The book that you see there, The Year of the Hopi, was published by the Smithsonian in what they called a site series, where they would put together exhibits and then make them available across the country to institutions that were looking for displays, history museums or art museums. And this was the catalog that went along with that particular exhibit. The exhibit was made up of photographs Joe had taken and writing he had done while he lived at Hopi, and then also these beautiful paintings that he did of Katsina figures. So it's a wonderful book. It's long since sold out, but it is usually, you can find it on eBay under Jo Mora. It comes up and used book sites as well. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. Here we have in downtown Monterey, this is the Pacific House building. And the figures that you see on the balcony are based on drawings that Jo Mora did on behalf of a company called the Mindenberg Production Company. Mr. Mindenberg was interested in doing a history of California, and he turned in terms of a motion picture, and he turned to Jo Mora as the costume coordinator, because Joe's background and his knowledge of California history was such that he could do these wonderful drawings and then give them to Mindenberg, who then could use them as the source material. Well, the movie was never made, but the figures lasted, and the state of California, which owns this building, came to Jo Mora Jr. and said, we'd like to use some of your dad's artwork for our display elements. And Joey was an incredible business person. He really championed his father's cause. And Joey said, well, I think that's a fine idea. I just don't want to pay California income tax. And the state said, okay. So that was his compensation for agreeing to let them use the work. And these figures are still there. They've been there for at least 20 years now, I think. And they're currently being refurbished, which is nice. And keep this in mind too for when we get to Jo Mora Day later on. Again, other examples of Joe's work being used as the display elements. His background in his art was so extensive that almost at least 50% of the display elements in this exhibit are based on Joe's artwork. And then we come to not so long ago, where Carmel by the Sea celebrated its 100th anniversary. Of course, they celebrated Jo Mora on the left using one of his, a portion of a mural that he created for the Carmel Dairy. The middle shows Monterey History and Art Association at a time when Joe's daughter Patty was a member of the organization. And she made artwork available to them on a sort of as needed basis. And then we have Mapping a Changing California. That exhibit was down the street at the California Historical Society. And if I'm not mistaken, this weekend may have been the last weekend, but they featured Joe's map of Yosemite in that exhibition. So Joe's work finds its way to a lot of different settings and other organizations. Wonderful book, Los Angeles in Maps. This was written by a gentleman by the name of Glenn Creason, who was the map librarian at the Los Angeles Central Library. I have pleasure of getting to know Glenn way back in the days when I first started my interest in Jo Mora, and Glenn saw fit to feature Joe's map of Los Angeles on the back cover of this book. And probably the two pieces that if you only know a very little bit about Jo Mora, what you probably know are these two pieces. They're, I would say, the most widespread examples of Joe's work in terms of that they were published probably 1,000 at a time, and they sold very inexpensively back in the day, so they were kind of easy to acquire. And these are the first two pieces that ever came to my attention, and I am pleased to say that the gentleman who kind of elaborated on these for me and said, oh, these are by this guy named Jo Mora, is Jim Munger, who's here with us tonight. And Jim and I and his wife Esther and my wife Celeste, we've known each other since 1981 and worked together for a lot of those years. And so it was Jim that, and I've often told the story about Jim said, oh yeah, I used to have one of those in my bedroom and I used to throw darts at it, and stuff. So, so that's very common in a funny way. I mean, these just became part of people's lives, and there wasn't a sense that, oh, I have to, put it on archival paper and put it behind, archival glass. It was just more, they were cool to have and they were fun to enjoy. This is the exhibit at the Monterey Museum of Art that I mentioned. Again, this was, Joey was still alive when I did this exhibit, and I approached the exhibit with his permission. That was the first thing that I knew I wanted to do. When the idea occurred to me to organize this display, I immediately, through the wonders of a small town, I had good access to Joey. I was introduced to him. We started our relationship. But I knew to him, I wanted to make sure that I had his blessing. And it was something, and he gave that to me kind of instantly. And that image, the Sweetheart of the Rodeo that you saw, has morphed in numerous occasions. Levi used it. They paid Joey for the rights to use it, a licensing agreement. There was a period where you could go into almost any store that sold Levi's and they would have that poster someplace on the wall. And then along come the Byrds, and specifically Chris Hillman, who was the Byrds bass player. Chris also rides rodeo, and I am convinced, and Chris has kind of casually mentioned that, yes, this is probably true. I think he's the one who talked to the Byrds and said, I got a great idea for the album cover. And so they went to Columbia Records, and Columbia Records went to Joey, and they all agreed. And so Joey was paid for the rights to do this. And the company that did the graphics rearranged that image in a wonderful way. And my favorite part about it is that on the back, it says illustration by Jo Mora.
Oh.
And that doesn't happen very often, where the artist gets credit in something like this. So that was very cool. And this is the image, the sweetheart of the rodeo, that probably has the longest legs, if you will. So there's an image, a couple of interpretations. The image on the right is a patch, like a woven patch. The idea, and they're sold at concerts, and the idea is you sew it onto the back of your Levi jacket or something like that. And then it's become swag. We've got long playing LP, we've got CDs, we've got t-shirts for concerts. It was featured when they did the 50th anniversary tour for the Birds. They asked me again, and they've always been really upfront about licensing agreements. So you can see it as a scarf, and then you see it on the drum. And then it becomes tattoos.
Oh my God.
So the tattoo on the left is the first one that came to my attention. This was a gentleman in Germany who wrote to me and said, I would like to use that image as a tattoo. And I couldn't refuse. So, I mean, and I also didn't charge him. But so that is on the back of his calf, on his leg. And then somebody sent me the picture of the woman's back. That was at a concert. And then just recently, there was an exhibit in Elko, Nevada of Joe's work. And the gentleman there on the right just happened upon the exhibit. And sure enough, he had his own sweetheart of the rodeo as well. And then this just came to my attention a few days ago, literally. My son lives in Austin, and South by Southwest is kicking up. And he saw this at a hot dog stand, and he sent this to me. So there we go. Joe's work has been used on CD covers. And this artist, Mike Beck, is a fantastic Western singer, but he can sing just about any genre of music you can think of. And Mike actually wrote a song about Jo Mora that's in the biography. It's a beautiful song. I've known Mike going back to the 90s. And so every time he thinks about using an image of Jo Mora, he just asks. And I kind of don't charge him anymore because it's been a wonderful reciprocal relationship. Right. Here we have a brochure of a camp in Carmel Valley, Douglas Ranch. The woman who owned the ranch at the time knew Joe and asked him to do some illustrations for the camp brochure, which Joe agreed to do. And this is a curious piece because it was created during Joe's lifetime, but it fell into disrepair. It's a sundial, and it's at the Ann Darling Elementary School, which is just on the edge of San Jose and San Carlos area. And they finally, I mean, they had approached me and said, you know, we've got this piece. We think Jo Mora did it, and yet it's kind of fallen into disrepair. What do you suggest? And I was able to put them in touch with the objects curator, who put it all back together again for them. And they now have it in the school garden on display, and it's very accurate time-wise, which is nice. And it kind of a very different piece for Joe. So it, in spite of having been made while Joe was there, it has a new future since he passed away. And these are sculptures, bronzes that Joe worked on during his lifetime, but I have created a limited edition series of these, limited to just 9 copies of each. There's about 12 bronzes that lasted through Joe's, after he passed away. And so they are, those are available, and the proceeds go to the History and Art Association and stuff, and they've been very well received, although it's gotten much harder to find good foundry. Here he was back in 1984, featured in California Magazine as This was a fold out, which was pretty cool at the time. That didn't happen very often. That's his map, one of his two maps of California. And then another issue, they did the Sweetheart of the Rodeo again. And then his work gets used in different ways to publicize different kinds of situations. And one of which was the National Day of the Cowboy. And this is kind of a one-woman project to create a National Day of the Cowboy for all 50 states. And she has got at least through 25 of them. And so imagine in every single state, it's going to the state legislature and it's getting them to agree and to declare, yes, you know, we will celebrate National Day of the Cowboy. And I have always supported her efforts and made art available to her. They also celebrated Jo Mora by giving him their Cowboy Keeper Award, which was really nice. And it also was a wonderful opportunity for me to work with Hatch Show Prints in Tennessee. Is it in Tennessee or is it in Tennessee? And they do this old-fashioned, old-style letterpress printing, and so I've done a number of projects with them for different organizations. And there's another one that we did. And then you get to see a 50-cent piece that they're really just for scale, although I'm going to show you another piece that relates to that. And then the National Day of the Cowboy did the pink pin, and the little badge that's down there was done, well, I'll get back to that in a second. At some point, this company made this tiny, tiny little version of the 50-cent piece. I don't really know why they did it, but that happened since Jo passed away. And now we flip to the Monterey County Courthouse. And this is a mural that celebrated different aspects of the courthouse and also the history of the judicial system in Monterey County. And you can see the heads that are on the building there. And then in the middle at the top, the figure of justice was Jo's work, as were the heads. And then above the justice figure that's sitting down, there's a fountain area. So Jo did all of those decorative elements on the courthouse, but then somebody chose to use those elements in a mural that's in the building now. And the new district attorney for Monterey County chose Jo's image of justice to be her badge, the central figure in her badge. So that goes back to the little pin that I showed you previously. And she used it a lot. It's on her stationery and it's on her badge. That building was recently refurbished, which was wonderful because the conversation was, do we tear it down or do we, put it back together again? They decided to put it back together again. And unbeknownst to me, they then decided to name the cafe after Jo Mora for having done all the decorative elements on the building. I went ahead and had these coasters made just kind of to celebrate the whole idea. And this building is a wonderful building to walk around if you're ever in downtown Salinas. Including murals that Jo did. We took a little bit of liberty here with the sign. It didn't initially say Jo's Cafe, but this is one of 7 murals that were up here in the Bay Area. In fact, they were at what is now Campton Place when it was the Drake Wilshire Hotel, and they were in the dining room area. They disappeared for many years and then were relocated and purchased by Paula and Terry Trotter, who own a gallery in Pacific Grove, California. And they have since licensed reproductions of the murals, this being just one of them. However, you may notice that the 2 football figures, one is Cal and the other is Stanford. And what we've been able to do is in the cafe, we've put up these decorative elements that that celebrate Joe's accomplishments, and also Robert Stanton, who was the architect of the building. So he's given some good credit as well. And then, because Joe's name was never on the building, the Native Sons of the Golden West took it upon themselves to fundraise or contribute money to have a bronze plaque created that is now on the building, acknowledging Joe's contributions. Stanton's name was there, but Joe's wasn't. And there's the number 3 is the building profile, and it's featured in a really nice pamphlet about the Art Deco architecture Salinas. And the Native Sons of the Golden West, as I understand it, each president, and they probably have a better word than president, but gets to design a belt buckle. And that becomes kind of their thank you to the people they work with at the end of their term. And I was asked by the president at the time if he could use Jo Mora's artwork. So the figure on horseback is based on Joe's art. And some of his work has turned into puzzles. The Yosemite Conservancy used the Yosemite image as a puzzle, as did Liberty Puzzles, which is a company in Colorado that do these very, very expensive laser cut images for their puzzle pieces. And they've done 3 of Joe's puzzles. And we've had an opportunity to publish Joe's work, not just in the biography, but this is a book that I was able to put together just what amounts to 1 chapter of Joe's life. And it was the time that he left California, going to Arizona, spent about 2 weeks in Yosemite, and he did artwork while he was there. He wrote while he was there and en route. And so this is kind of a compilation of that chapter of his life. And then the image on the right is from a Los Angeles Times advertisement for Yosemite with Joe's little woodland creatures. And some projects start and stop. This was a gentleman who approached me and wanted to do some trays, like the TV dinner kind of trays. And so he did a couple of mock-ups, and at some point he decided I didn't want to pursue it. So that fell flat, as did this, which was another couple of people I worked with for a while who wanted to do quilts and blankets and different kinds of things with him. And that didn't turn out to be a successful story either. But then again, Joe's work pops up in other places. American Surveyor magazine. The gentleman who wrote the article for that publication happened to see the exhibit that was at the Central Library in Los Angeles and got very interested in Jo Mora and put together a nice article. The booklets on the right were done as well, just as good keepsakes about different parts of Joe's life. And then it pops up in a novel, Spade and Archer, and I can't read that right now, but Joe was a member of the Bohemian Club, and that's referenced in the book here. So somebody did their research, because that's kind of takes a deep dive to figure that and know that about the Bohemian Club and to know it about Jo Mora. And we're back to the book club. The first project they undertook that had anything to do with Jo Mora was this wonderful little pamphlet. It was one of their keepsakes of California book illustrators, of which they included Joe as one of them. And then they honored me by publishing another keepsake about Jo Mora. And I will always kind of assume that because this was so successful and actually ended up selling out, that that's what led them to trust the publication of the fancy book. And they've always been very supportive of me. And anytime I came up with an idea about Jo Mora and wanted to write about it, they've said yes. And so there's several examples here. And this is another interesting story. The image on the left is Joe's cart for Los Angeles. And Nancy Grossman approached me at one point, and she had just discovered this cart, and she became totally fascinated with it. And she went ahead and published her own book that is this incredibly detailed, annotated response to Joe's cart. And she literally went figure by figure throughout the entire poster and wrote 1 or 2 paragraphs about each image, each vignette. And it's a wonderful read because it's like this companion piece to the cart. You really, they're so, each is so enriched by the other. She did a great job on that. And then Joe, those people in the world of the cowboy and the vaquero and stuff, they're a pretty knowledgeable group of people in terms of the world of Jo Mora. This was a wonderful event. This is a publication, but it celebrated Vaquero Days in San Juan Bautista for a number of years. There would be a yearly gathering, and Joe's illustrations were used in that. And the Monterey County Fair has embraced Jo Mora in about, I would say, 6 out of the last 10 years, maybe. They've used his artwork as their visual. And that's, you see it on the public buses and you see it on billboards, and lots of swag gets produced. And that's been a really nice relationship. There's a couple other examples. They make blankets. The image on the right was a box of chocolates with Joe's mural on the cover. And then little stickers and bumper stickers and magnets for your refrigerator, so lots of swag. And then some very nice stationery as well. So this is using illustrations from Jo Mora's book, Budgie Budgie Cottontail, and with the illustrations on the cover, and then I was able to, supplement each image with the text that went along with it. And that's our refrigerator at home. So there's at least 3 magnets there from the fair. And this is this year's fair image. So I thought we probably had exhausted the opportunities, but no, sure enough, they approached me and said, "Oh, we want to use the burros." So this is for 2023. And then Joe's work seeps its way into art work as well. A colleague of mine, Dominique Patern, used Joe's work for collages and created her own kind of compositions with these. And a gentleman, Robert Matthews, approached me and said, I'd like to use Joe's art and create my own interpretation of it. And of course I said yes. His agreement with me was that he would let me show his work tonight. So fulfilled. And then there's, so we have on the right, the Desert Rose Band. That actually is Chris Hillman's band. So he still is interested and he still asks for licensing agreements. The image on the left, the Buckaroo Brew Pale Ale, that didn't start out so great because this was brought to my attention by somebody who happened to have a bottle of the beer at a bar and noticed that it was Jo Mora's artwork on it. And I hadn't been approached for licensing agreement, which happens more than you would like to think. But I approached the company and it was just a family doing this beer. And I just said, if you could at least acknowledge that it's Jo Mora, that goes a long ways. And, if you want to trade, a couple of 6-packs of beer and stuff, we can make peace, which we did. And so it was a happy ever after story. and Cobb Lund, another musician who wanted to use Joe's artwork. This has become a very popular image amongst singers. It's called Singing to 'Em, which probably has something to do with the connection. And then we get into some contemporary strife. This is a sculpture on the left that Joe did of Father Sarah back in the 30s, which has since been removed in some sense of trying to come to terms with some political correctness. This sat at an intersection in the Carmel Woods, part of Carmel, for many, many years. It actually had been vandalized before. Once, I think politically, the other time, I think high school prank. But when things started to get kind of uncomfortable in terms of imagery and public sculpture and things, the city of Carmel decided to take it down and just put it in safekeeping. And what's happened since then is it turns out that that little tiny piece of land where it sits is owned by Monterey County. Well, Monterey County has decreed that they will never allow it to go back, this Father Sarah sculpture. They just don't want to deal with that can of worms. And so it then was given to the neighborhood association, and the neighborhood association is trying to decide what to do with it. They don't know yet. They haven't found an inviting open arms solution yet. So it remains in storage and until somebody figures out where its home is going to be. Now I've proposed that other Jo Mora sculptures could go in its place, but that hasn't happened yet either. So I don't know. And again, another image from another exhibit. There have been a number of exhibits since Joe passed away of his work. And the one here at the book club is a perfect example in terms of I try to make them site specific, and there's always a changing theme. This was a show that I actually really enjoyed because I was able to collect everything Joe had done kind of about the California missions, and they had a nice display area at the mission. So that was one of the first I did after the big exhibit at the museum. Posters from other exhibits. What was nice about this combination is it was multi-venue at the same time. One of the exhibits was at the Monterey Maritime Museum, and the other was at the Steinbeck Center in Salinas. So it was nice. People could go back and forth and see two different exhibits, but they were both, chapters of Jo Mora's career.
The one in the mission, is it still there?
There is still a mission exhibit, and it does still have some of Joe's work, but it's not the same. It's not start to finish the same as the one that I put together. Yeah. But in addition, in the room, which is called the Jo Mora Chapel, there is Jo Mora's cenotaph, which he created, which is a spectacular sculptural piece that he did in honor of Father Sarah, and that is in the heart of the room. And then the display cases are around it.
I just saw it.
Oh, yeah.
A few weeks ago, and when I saw that, I was like, oh.
So
yeah. It wasn't your exhibit, but it was still his work.
Similar but different. Yes, yes. And wherever I can find a place that might make sense to have a Jo Mora exhibit, I reach out. But this was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Central Library in Los Angeles. This one also took 3 years because of COVID. And the swag that's been put together. And there's a couple of slides I'm going to show you that are related to the exhibit here. This is an example of my having done a publication based on Joe's work. And if you look at the image on the left, those I found, with the exception of the cover of the book, I found all of these in a manila envelope. And with the text for the story. So I was convinced I had the whole book. All the illustrations, everything was numbered. It made total sense, just there were no gaps. And so on behalf of Jo Mora and with the family, I was able to publish that book, and it's one of the ones that's here up on the top shelf and back of us. And again, it's the only example that I found of an unpublished complete book. We've got lots of fragments of things that he wrote and illustrated, or, gave illustration examples. But this one was the only one that I was convinced was complete. And so again, I was able to publish it and recoup the expenses. And this happened just as I was getting interested in Jo Mora in the mid-90s. Somebody did a reproduction of Joe's most famous books, Trail Dust and Saddle Leather and Californios. This was done by a gentleman up in Idaho, Dave Stockline, who was a fine art Western photographer and really enjoyed Jo Mora's work. He approached Joe Jr. and said, the books were out of print. They were printed initially in the 40s and they were sold out and long gone. And Dave approached Joey and said, what would you think about redoing that edition? And Joey agreed if Dave would also publish Budgie Budgie Cottontail, and so I'm going to go back here, but this was a beautiful presentation. It was in this wonderful slipcase, and Stephen Mitchell wrote this wonderful biography, and it was done beautifully. I mean, it was really a very high quality project. Well, Jo Mora had written the text and done the illustrations for Budgie Budgie Cottontail back in the 30s. And Joey had tried and tried and tried and could never find a publisher for it. And unfortunately, Jo Mora passes away. He never sees it published, but Joey never gave up. And so when Dave approached him to do Trail Dust and Californios, Joey, quick as a whip again, said, yes, if you do Budgie Budgie Cottontail. And Dave was thrilled to do Budgie Budgie Cottontail. He jumped at the opportunity and he did a fantastic job. He worked really well with Joey in terms of checking color, balance, and the layout and everything else. So it ended up being a great project. And Joey was able to keep his promise. And speaking of tattoos, that's my tattoo. So,
Are these still in print?
they're out of print. Yeah, if Chippy the Monk and Budgie Budgie Cottontail are both out of print, it's pretty easy to find Budgie Budgie Cottontail on eBay. And the price varies, but that has good life on eBay stuff or any other used book sites. So, and another example of an image, and this is from a notebook, sketchbook of Jo Mora's from the ride he did that was featured in one of Nigel's little drawings, his maps. Joe rode the El Camino Real with a sketchbook, a camera, a blank journal, and a set of watercolors. And he did these paintings, and I've been able to reproduce those and create a portfolio based on those. And then they're spectacular. And this was one of the more curious requests, but Louis Vuitton publishes books, and they're all based on a location around the world. And they wanted to do one about Texas, and they asked permission to use one of the images of Jo Mora's as the background in one of the photographs, which I said yes to. Well, the commerce of this became so complicated in terms of them sending money from a French bank account to a California bank that I just finally said, skip it, use it, do it, but we don't need to collect any fees for it. So in fact, just like 2 days ago, I got the book in the mail. And It's probably a 60-page book, and all they used was a fragment of one of Joe's drawings as the background of a photograph stuff. It was just, I wasted so much time trying to negotiate this. But, and here's another cutie. I am very enthusiastically working with a woman who lives up in Northern California and has a company called Buckaroo Baby, and she's making little jumpers and blankets using Joe's artwork. These have not been produced, they haven't been manufactured yet, but they're in the pipeline, as they say. And a very recent project that it was just thrilling for me. I won't go into the whole story except to say that in the Jo Mora archive are many of the printing plates that he actually used when he did his carts. And it was 4-color printing, so there would have been a black plate, a magenta plate, a cyan plate, and a yellow plate. And those would go through the press one at a time and end up with full color. Well, and these things weigh a ton. I mean, I'm not sure how you could find a press anymore, except we did, but big enough to accommodate these, because they were the actual size of the posters. And so through a wonderful set of coincidences, I discovered the International Printing Museum in Carson, California, which is down near the LA airport. And I proposed to them, let's have a Jo Mora printing day. And they didn't know who Jo Mora was, but they were quickly on board. And so we did that. And we took the Los Angeles black plate and the California black plate down there and put them on presses. And this is the gentleman, Mark, that I worked with. And those are the results. And what happens with that kind of printing is the black is the details. So by printing just the black plate, you get these wonderful maps. And those are what you see. He's holding up the Los Angeles, and then the California is on the right. And it gives you a sense of the size, by him holding it up as well. And it was just a great event. And we did a very small edition of these, and they match very nicely, side by side sort of. And we didn't break the bank to sell them and stuff, but it was just very exciting. And then we also took some other of Joe's cartoons and drawings and made bookmarks. The little one at the top became a bookmark, and then stationery, the terry-pin turtle was used for stationery. And these were, kids were able to do this as well. It was just a great weekend event. And we're kind of redoing this coming up April 15th in Monterey, where we are conducting the first Jo Mora Day. And it's going to be a chance to go to 5 different venues, including Pacific House, which I showed you, and then 4 other venues that belong to the Monterey History and Art Association. And in each one, there's going to be an activity to do hands-on activity. We have Jo Mora coloring book that we printed, and we'll be using the letterpress to do the bookmarks and stationery. And then and people will be able to walk. There's a little finder's map. You walk throughout the different venues, and in each one is going to be some different display of Jo Mora's work. So this is a first-time deal. I have no idea. I said if we're going to have 2 people or 200, I don't know. And hopefully it won't rain, but we're going to give it a try. So that's coming up, and you're all invited. It's free. So, and again, back to the book club and the biography that they so graciously printed, and the announcement for this exhibit. And there we go. So that's my book plate. So, and thank you very much.
Well, we have time for some questions. If you'd like to take some questions from the audience.
Sure,
Can we
sure.
start here? Anyone have a question?
I have
Mariana?
a few, because I didn't want to
Oh,
interrupt.
okay.
The name of the woman who's creating the state days of the cowboy? Day
Say-
of the cowboy, the woman who's doing that?
Oh,
Read
I'm
the
gonna,
question if you
yeah,
can.
yeah, yeah, no, the name of the National Day of the Cowboy, I'll get it for you. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Is the LA Cart and Trail Guide available in a bundle?
I don't know. Nancy she lives back east and she's had trouble. The question was about the trail guide. I would just start by Googling it and see what happens. If you can't get in touch with her, let me see if I can find some contact information for her.
Thank you.
so.
The LA and California black plate carts sold out, I'm guessing.
Not yet. Yeah,
Available?
we only did 23 copies of each.
Where do I write?
To me,
To you?
yeah, to me, yeah.
Okay, and the April 15 walk drive, Google it, we'll figure it out. Monterey.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yeah. There's, in that ad that I showed, there are 5 sites and you can start at any one of the 5 sites. And then
Oh, so it's
just,
a self,
yeah, it's a self-guided little walking tour. But again, I can get you, it's easy. There's,
Okay.
Another question here in the audience, back there, and then I'll go online.
Did he choose when to use Joseph Jacinto? Were there criteria for?
there was, yes. And he did change the way he signed his work over the course of his career. From the time he was a boy, he often would do Jo Mora. And then eventually it turned to Jo Mora when his father died. And I think for him, it was a symbolic kind of shifting of his position in the world. And so he changed it to Jo Mora, and that he pretty much stuck with that the rest of his career. However, he did occasionally, he developed his initials into what looks like a brand. It's like a JM and then a backwards J, which would Joseph and Jacinto. And backwards, that only shows up maybe 4 times that I can think of. So it was very conscientious and deliberate on his part.
Paul,
And Darling Elementary School, where I went to kindergarten. Yes. And I remember the sundial. I had no idea that was Jo Mora.
Yeah, yeah.
And at the time I went there, this original 1930 school building was still there, except we weren't allowed in it.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
But I was wondering, were there decorative elements in the school building?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Now, at the time, Joe was living in the San Jose area, and I speculate that his kids may have gone to Ann Darling Elementary School.
Okay.
And not necessarily for a long period of time, but she was, if I'm not mistaken, was a renowned teacher there that everybody loved, and they ended up naming the school after her,
In
I
the San
think.
Jose School District.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And I just, do you happen to know, do any other authorities in San Jose know about that sculpture?
Well, the school district approached me initially,
Yeah.
so somebody in the facilities department of the school district approached me, and that's when I was able to guide them
Okay,
to the
I mean, I just
curator, but
wondered, does the Arts Council know?
yeah, I suspect that they don't. And I've not, there's another reason for another hook in San Jose, well, 2 others. One is there's a home he lived in for a period of time that is still there. I mean, I think it's been kind of, refurbished to a certain extent, but it still looks as if it did in the time. And what's now the San Jose Athletic Club and used to be the Scottish Rite
Oh,
Temple.
yeah, I used to be in it.
Well, Joe did the decorative elements on that too.
Oh.
And
okay.
that building merits being on the National Register of Historic Places. And to my knowledge, nobody has taken the time to do that. So,
Okay, well, that is in the St. James Park
yes,
Historic District.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So if you know any people who are involved in the history of San Jose, we should have a conversation and stuff.
So we have a couple of Zoom questions and we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to try to take 2 or 3 of these if we can. Can you speak to Jo Mora's architectural terracotta work in terms of today's interest?
Well, I will go so far as to say that I think without exception, everything he created back in the early 1900s, with maybe one exception, still exists on the buildings he intended it to be on. So I think that speaks very highly of the quality of the work, the fact that it hasn't ruffled current day feathers to a certain extent. The one that I know was taken down in Los Angeles and it disappeared. But I think, I think that says a lot that you can still go and see virtually all of these artistic efforts.
And there is also a question, can you talk about the Cervantes monument at the De Young?
Yes, another one of the lasting efforts that Jo did. That was a commission by some people here in San Francisco to honor Cervantes. It's still there. It's just to the maybe north of the De Young Museum. If you face the De Young entrance, it's on the right. And it's a wonderful, I think, combination of materials. It's both stone and bronze, integrated very meticulously and creatively. I believe his father may have done a piece in Uruguay, which is where Jo was born, that used those same combination of materials. Most recently, that piece had paint thrown on it when an adjacent sculpture was actually destroyed. And fortunately, it was just paint, and the maintenance people were able to clean it, and you would not know it happened now. The curious part about that is that it was pretty misplaced anger, because maybe Cervantes was a slave owner. I don't know that, but there really wasn't any reason to terrorize Jo's sculpture the way the other one was that was next to it.
So there seems to be a great interest in this potential walking tour that you keep mentioning, which we would love to do if we can work it out. If you're on Zoom, you can put in the chat or in the Q&A that you're interested, and I'll put you on a list. So when we put that together, I'll be able to reach out to you. And if you're here in the audience, just let me know and I'll check you off that you're interested as well in participating on the walking tour. And the last thing, a couple people have asked for your contact information. So if you want to just
put that up there.
give it up, you took the slide down.
Yeah, I did.
So you'll have to say it.
Yeah,
out loud.
the easiest way is probably just to go to Jo Mora Collection and Google that, and my name will show up on the last page of that, and with contact information. So,
and you can always contact me. I'll put you in touch with Peter as well.
yeah.
There are a couple of questions here. Lori, for example, you have a great question. I'm going to get that to Peter so he can get back to you about that. And if you have any other questions that you didn't get into the chat or the Q&A, now's the time to do it. I will share those with Peter afterwards, and we'll get back to you as best we can with some of those answers.
Okay. Yeah.
So on that note, I'm going to take out my little goodbye script and say, on behalf of the Book Club of California, I want to thank our presenter, Peter Hiller, for today. Round of applause. And thank you all for coming out and attending this presentation in person or virtually on Zoom. Join us for our next event. It's the exhibition opening for American Ingenuity and Innovation, Kitchen Appliance Instruction Manuals. That's going to be on display here at the book club starting next week, Monday, April 3rd. Today is the last day for the Jo Mora exhibition. So if you're here in the room, check it out before you leave. We're going to have remarks by the curator for that exhibition. It's Liz Pollock. She's an author, collector, and the proprietor of the Cook's Bookcase. And she'll be here to talk about the exhibition next week. You can register for that event online at bccbooks.org/programs, or in any of the emails that you might be getting from the Book Club of California. There's always a register to attend the events in there. So check those out. Again, thanks everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you back again here soon in person or on Zoom. Good night.
Thank you.